Let me tell you something. Do you like monster movies? Anybody? I love monster movies. I simply adore monster movies, and the cheaper they are, the better they are. And cheapness, in the case of a monster movie, has nothing to do with the budget of the film, although it helps. But true cheapness is exemplified by visible nylon strings attached to the jaw of a giant spider. I'll tell you a good one that I saw one time. I think the name of the film was It Conquered the World. And do you ever see that one? The monster looks sort of like an inverted ice cream cone with teeth around the bottom. It's like a teepee or a sort of a rounded off pup tent affair. And it's got fangs on the base of it. I don't know why, but it's a very threatening sight. And then he's got a frown and, ugly mouth and everything. And there's this one scene where the monster is coming out of a cave, see? There's always a scene where they come out of the cave, at least once. And the rest of the cast, it must have been made around the 1950s. The lapels are about like that wide. The ties are about that wide, and they're about this short. And they always have a little revolver that they're going to shoot the monster with. And there's always a girl who falls down and twists her ankle. Of course there is. You know how they are. The weaker sex and everything, twisting their ankle on behalf of the little ice cream cone. Well, in this particular scene, folks, they didn't want to retake it because it must have been so good they wanted to keep it. But when the monster came out of the cave, just over on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see about this much 2x4 attached to the bottom of the thing as the guy is pushing it out. And then, obviously, off camera, somebody's going, "No, get it back." And they drag it back just a little bit as the guy's going... Now that's cheapness. All right.
And good evening from the movie program Take Two, allowing Frank Zappa talking about cheap horror movies to the music that was employed by Stanley Kubrick for his great film The Shining. In fact, we should make note that the music included right there that we just heard by Bela Bartok from his piece Music for Strings, Percussion, and Celesta, which was composed in 1936. And you know what the season is, folks. It's spooky and chills and thrills, and what better opportunity for us to talk horror and monster movies. It's Take Two, the movie program on Public Radio KCBX. Across the aisle from me, looking great in his black cape, and the fangs are lengthening. It's Count Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me, the electrodes being attached to his neck as we speak. The one, the only, the undisputed czar of film on the Central Coast, your friend and mine, Jim Dee.
Hey, Bob, it's time to have fun on the show.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun tonight. And let's not forget in the projection booth, our good friend Hank.
Yeah. Well, we're ready. I think if you know this program, if we have the opportunity to talk about monster movies or horror movies, we dive right in. And so considering the Halloween season, We're going to do that tonight, and actually some information about some new releases, some old standbys. The Halloween season, you perhaps dress up, go to a party, or you enjoy the trick-or-treaters coming to your door, but there is that moment when you have to sit down and watch a scary film.
Absolutely. It's a tradition as old as time itself. And without any further ado, Jimmy, let's get rolling.
I think one of the foremost things we should talk about is the re-release of the Val Lewton series of horror films on DVD. A whole score of films that previously weren't available, and Val Lewton, a Russian immigrant who worked for RKO Pictures, and his shall we say, his filmography of horror films, which they're kind of a cut above, and they're much more psychological. We'll get to the Universal horror stuff in a little bit. Those are classic, great monster, vampires, wolfmen, and that sort of thing. But there's a different thing going on in these Val Lewton films. Absolutely.
I mean, super low budget, but real clever use of atmosphere, lighting, and character development raise these films. And of course, we're talking about such movies as The Cat People, Curse of the Cat People, The Body Snatcher, Isle of the Dead, Leopard Man, I Walk with a Zombie, to name but a few. Really elevate these out of the world of kind of B-movie horror into the world of real cinema art, for want of a better term. These are terrific films, folks. I mean, I know we touched upon them last time when we were talking about Robert Wise, but for a great horror creepathon that's good for the whole family, the Val Lewton films are highly recommended.
And they look great, Bob. I was watching Cat People and Curse of the Cat People today, and these new DVDs, they just look crisp and beautiful on the screen. The black and white cinematography is beautiful, but I think it's important to impart to our listeners, there's just a little bit different thing going on with these films. I mean, there's just a more of a human element. There is, they're all really kind of short, about 60, 70 minutes each.
Yep.
And, economic filmmaking, you get the story told, you get your chills and scares out there, very economically, but it's a testament to this great filmmaker, a great producer who put these films out.
And I think we could also add, Jim, intelligent filmmaking.
Intelligent. Well, here's a clip. This is from The Cat People, and to set up this scene, the woman in the scene who I failed...
Simone Simon. She is the cat woman.
She is a cat woman.
Yes.
Unlike the Batman one.
Precisely.
And there's much more of a psychological thing going on here. She walks up to these cages with some panthers in them at a zoo, and there's a key in the lock of the cage. And she goes up to it, sort of looks at the cat, and then takes the key out and gives it to the zookeeper. And here's what happens next. This is from The Cat People.
You resist temptation admirably.
Temptation?
The key.
Well, why would I want it?
For many reasons. There is, in some cases, a psychic need to loose evil upon the world. And we all of us carry within us a desire for death. You fear the panther, yet you're drawn to him again and again. Couldn't you turn to him as an instrument of death? You didn't come back to see me Friday. I've had to come to you.
Well, how did you know where to find me?
You told me many things. Why didn't you come back?
I don't feel you can help me. You're very wise, you know a great deal. Yet when you speak of the soul, you mean the mind. And it is not my mind that is troubled.
What a clever girl. All the psychologists have tried for years to find that subtle difference between mind and soul. And you found it.
It does seem presumptuous of me, doesn't it? Goodbye, Doctor.
That's from the newly re-released version of The Cat People, produced by the great Val Lewton, who produced a whole score of these wonderful low-budget horror films that have just been re-released, and they're in double features on each DVD, or else you can get the whole package and see the whole lot of these great cinema classics really now of horror films mainly from the 40s.
All from the 40s, Jim.
All from the 40s.
I might add the film was remade in 1982.
Oh, yeah.
The Paul Schrader remake with Natasha Kinski. I was just flashing on it, Jimmy, when I was listening to this. Like, whoa, and the David Bowie theme song, which was pretty nutty.
Yeah, I think
and
John Hurd was in it.
And Malcolm McDowell was in it. Yeah. And I believe the reason why I flashed on it, Jim, was I think when they remade it, they had the scene at the zoo, and it's Ed Begley Jr., who's the zookeeper, and gets his arm ripped off. Oh. And, that film is infamous in its own right.
Boy, what a difference from this
what a
version
difference
from the
30 or 40 some odd years makes.
Well, we do highly recommend the Val Lewton films, beautifully restored and now available on DVD. And going back to this premise that during the Halloween season, it's imperative that you do see a good horror film. Thank goodness that Universal, that we've talked about this before, Universal Pictures has gone into their treasure trove of horror films, which pretty much were hugely popular from back in the very early 30s with the first Frankenstein. And they've wonderfully packaged them. There's the Frankenstein series, there's the Wolfman series, the Dracula series. There's a whole bunch of these films out there. They're just a lot of fun and perfect Halloween viewing. Absolutely, Jimmy. All the sets come with 2 discs, especially with the classic monsters. The order of release gets a little messed with because for some reason Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is on the Wolfman series. House of Dracula is with the Dracula films. So the continuity, because they really kind of go Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein, then Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula. That's the order, but the sets kind of break it up a little bit. That's the only knock I have. Boy, but what as I mentioned, a treasure trove of these great films that were hugely popular when they were released, and then hugely popular again when they were re-released, and also when television came around, these were popping up on TV, and also hugely popular there as well. Absolutely. I mean, atmospheric and a lot of fun. Let's get you into the atmosphere. Here's the great Lon Chaney Jr. from The Wolfman.
You killed the wolf.
Well, there's no crime in that, is there?
The wolf was Bela.
You think I don't know the difference between a wolf and a man?
Bela became a wolf, and you killed him. A werewolf can be killed only with a silver bullet, or a silver knife, or a stick with a silver handle.
You're insane. I tell you, I killed a wolf, a plain, ordinary wolf.
Take this charm, the pentagram, the sign of the wolf. It can break the evil spell.
Evil spell. Pentagram. Wolfbane. Oh, I'm sick of the whole thing. I'm going to get out of here.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
Oh, quit handing me that. You're just wasting your time.
The wolf bit you, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, he did.
Wear this charm over your heart always.
All right, I'll take it. What's it worth to you? I'll give you...
to show me the wound?
What?
Do you dare to show me the wound? Go now, and heaven help you.
From the classic Universal production of The Wolfman, the great Lon Chaney Jr. You know, Bob, considering the career of Lon Chaney Jr., sometimes they sort of pigeonholed him as not that great of an actor, but I actually think he's a great actor. I always think of him as Larry Talbot, the cursed man who was bitten by the wolf and becomes a wolf by the full moon. But also the legacy of Lon Chaney Jr. going back to his father, who I learned it only recently, just how hugely popular Lon Chaney Sr. was. Of course, he was in such great films as the early version of Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera, the original. There was a documentary, might have been on Turner Classic Movies, about the life of Lon Chaney Sr. And boy, when he died, I mean, the whole world, or at least all of America, was just in mourning. And it's interesting to think of Lon Chaney Jr., in the shadow of his father, or with that legacy behind him. And there's that the horror film was essential for both of their careers, I believe.
Absolutely, Jimmy. And a lot of people don't realize that Lon Chaney Sr. was a real master of makeup. I mean, here's a guy who really basically wrote the book on transforming himself for each role. I mean, I think he did a film called The Penalty back in 1925 where he literally had his legs like pulled up behind his back in a harness so he'd have no legs, and he was utterly believable. I mean, he was a real craftsman. And interestingly enough, his influence was not only felt in The Wolfman by his son, but Jack Pierce, the makeup man, was a disciple of Lon Chaney Sr. So the Lon Chaney Sr. influence is felt very deeply here.
I find it fascinating with a film where makeup is needed to transform an actor, and you go to some sort of designer and they design what it's going to look like, and then you get the makeup artist who actually applies the makeup on a daily basis while the film is being done. Whereas you've seen pictures of Lon Chaney Sr., who's got this like a suitcase full of stuff that he himself created. He himself, I guess when they were filming a Phantom of the Opera, I mean, he was in a lot of pain with this makeup that he put on, but it's what it took to, create these roles and create these characters.
And he put it on himself.
Yes.
I think when he did London After Midnight, he emerged from his dressing room and he freaked out a lot of people.
Boy. Well, there's some great additions to the lists that we're giving you of great horror films, great Halloween season films. Go back to the original Phantom of the Opera. Look at the original, or at the career of the Lon Chaney Sr., some great stuff for Halloween, and I just, as we do the show here, Bob, I mean, just stuff keeps popping in. We're going to be talking about Dracula here, and before we talk about the classic Bela Lugosi Dracula, which has been re-released on DVD by Universal, we've got to go back to Nosferatu, which is around the 1919, I believe, somewhere around there.
Max Schreck.
Max Schreck is easily one of the creepiest vampire films of all, and to this day, here it is it's 80 plus years old, and it still packs a wallop. It is scary. In fact, there's a scene in Nosferatu where I'm not sure if it's Renfield or Van Helsing or whoever it is in the film, who looks out the window, and you see Max Schreck standing way off. I mean, it's not like he's right there in your face. It's not the open the window and there's the face right at your, right in your face. But he's standing way off in the distance, and it is scarier than hell. I mean, it is creepy. Of course, Max Schreck is really a creepy Dracula, probably the creepiest ever put on screen. But this film, what it does to you, even 80 years on, I should get the exact date, but still, we're talking about this film having the scares in it way, way after.
Yeah, I think it's like 86 years old. F.W. Murnau, I believe, did this, and it's a classic of the ages. I would recommend to folks, if you're looking to see the film, make sure you get a good print of it. It's been in public domain off and on over the years, and some of the public domain prints are really faded, and they have white subtitles to it that are unwatchable. So look for maybe the Kino or the Black Hawk Films edition of that. It's a much better print, and it's much easier to follow.
So we highly recommend the original Max Schreck version of Nosferatu. Werner Herzog, the German director, did a remake in the 70s or
79.
So. Yeah. I like the original.
Yeah. It's got Kinski.
Klaus Kinski, yes.
But no.
I would stick with the original. Well, while we're on the subject of vampires, of course, we will go back to Universal, the wonderfully re-released DVD editions of their classic series. And let's get in the mood. This is from the original Dracula starring Bela Lugosi.
Castle Dracula?
Yes, that's where I'm going.
To the castle?
Yes.
No. You mustn't go there. We people of the mountains believe at the castle there are vampires. Dracula and his wives. They take the form of wolves and bats. They leave their coffins at night and they feed on the blood of the living.
Oh, but that's all superstition. Why, I can't understand why...
Clear enough! Look, the sun. When it is gone, they leave their coffins. Come, we must go indoors.
But wait. I mean, just a minute. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not afraid. I've explained to the driver that it's a matter of business with me. I've got to go, really.
It's the voice of Dwight Fry, who should be wary of going to Castle Dracula, but of course he doesn't heed the warnings of the townsfolk.
And I gotta admit, Jim, I've always had a soft spot for Dwight Fry in all his hammy, manic craziness over the years. I mean, he really gave a lot to Dracula, the first Dracula and the first Frankenstein, and every other Universal horror picture he showed up in is one of the angry villagers, usually part of the mob with the torches, was Dwight Fry. A wonderful, insane, but just a special character actor.
So just once again talking about the Universal re-releases, they're all great. Have they? I believe they come out with the Invisible Man series as well.
Invisible Man, and that includes all the Invisible Man movies, like the Invisible. Let's see, Invisible Man's Revenge, Invisible Agent, Invisible Woman. They're all there.
You know, how Universal mined these characters and how many films were actually made of the Wolfman series, the Dracula series, Frankenstein series. Then we get into the Invisible Man. We get into the Mummy.
Oh, man, the Mummy. Forget it. It's like, I think there were 5 of those, too.
They knew how to do it, and it's great that they're re-releasing these on DVD. And again, I have to emphasize how beautiful they look. The black and white cinematography is fabulous.
Absolutely, and let's not forget The Creature from the Black Lagoon. That series is available as well.
Universal came through. They knew it. They knew how to make a good monster movie.
They certainly did.
Well, as we're on the subject of vampires, we move on to another film company that not only made films, all different types of genre films and exploitation films, but did especially well in the horror field. And we're talking about Hammer Films from Great Britain. And we have to mention, to me, you think of the original Dracula being Bela Lugosi, but it's hard not to think of Dracula and not think of Christopher Lee.
Absolutely, Jimmy. You know, I think both Lugosi and Christopher Lee are synonymous with Dracula. And the Hammer Dracula is a whole other take on it all. First of all, it's in Technicolor, very stylized, very bloody, and very sensual, as well as his physical size is quite imposing. I mean, Christopher Lee is a very tall man. I think he's like 6'6", 6'7". He's big, and his Dracula is terrifying.
We just happen to have audio from the great Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, who was also, boy, those two guys were hand in hand. They were in so many of these films together. So many Dracula films from Hammer, but a number of other vampire films that didn't have Dracula. Just, they really mined that genre very well. From a documentary, what is the documentary called, Bob?
It is called Flesh and Blood. the Hammer horror legacy.
If you get into some of the great Hammer films and you've seen them, or you, as a result of this program, take a look, check out this documentary just talking about this great film company. And as I mentioned, we have Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing right now talking about Hammer films.
They remain on record as the most consistently successful British film company in history. From offices in Wardour Street in the heart of London's film business district, and from the small Thames side studio near Windsor Castle, they made films that played in every country in the world, in every category of entertainment. Grand period adventures like Pirates of Blood River, grim military stories such as Yesterday's Enemy, police dramas, suspense thrillers, comedies, travelogues, dramas.
But for most of the world, the name Hammer conjures images of fantasy and terror. Like comedies from Britain's Ealing Studio, cartoons from Disney, or westerns from the Republic, the Hammer style was unique and distinctive. By subtle implication and by graphic depiction, the company made its international reputation with the primal elements of exploitation films: sexuality and violence, flesh and blood.
The voice of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee talking about Hammer films, and those are the elements: flesh and blood, sexuality and violence. It's almost as if, Bob, that the Hammer Film Company was just kind of starting over what Universal had started, about 3 decades earlier. And they're just sort of, hey, let's redo Frankenstein, let's redo Dracula, but as you said, let's really make it stylized, use the Technicolor, and really, make it a little bit more contemporary and sexy.
Well, Jim, what's fascinating is you could, say, turn on a TV in the middle of the night, and you come right in the middle, and you just look at the way a scene is shot, and you go, that's Hammer.
Yes.
That's the same way you would with Universal, with their monsters. Like, you see the black and white and the style of the picture, even if you're not seeing anybody in it. It's Universal. And the same is true of Hammer. And Hammer is thrilling people, decades after its demise. I think it wrapped up production in 1980, and here it is 25 years later. People still love Hammer films.
Yeah, great stuff. And, before we take our 7 o'clock break, I do want to mention, because we'll get into the whole swing of things, and I'll forget to mention these, but I was just watching Christopher Lee today with Edward Woodward in The Wicker Man. There's a title I want to throw out there. Some of the favorite horror films around the Halloween season tend towards, and the heavier ones include The Exorcist, perhaps the Omen series. As heavy as The Exorcist, we have Rosemary's Baby for the great Roman Polanski. But perhaps the least known of this group of films, which really focuses on the big battle of Satan and God, the British film with Christopher Lee, The Wicker Man, is really creepy. I mean, it is. I would say that it would really take on those religion is really a focal point. I mean, Edward Woodward is trying to find out about a girl who is missing, a young girl, and essentially goes to this island. And we're talking about the entire, in Rosemary's Baby, it's the surrounding neighbors are Satan worshipers. And in this film, the entire island are Satan worshipers. And boy, it is carried off in such a way that it's just an amazing film. I just want to get the title out there for a cinema experience for our listeners.
Absolutely,
if they haven't
Jim.
seen it.
And we got to mention the unedited UK version of it. It's got Britt Eklund, and you get a little bit more Britt Eklund in the unrated one. What's interesting about this film, Jim, they're not really Satanists per se, but they're some kind of like a druid religion of the earth. They're kind of benign in their own way where they live.
Yes.
But they still require sacrifices.
Yes.
And Edward Woodward is it's a terrific film, and it's definitely a cut above your average horror fare. Jim and I both highly recommend The Wicker Man.
Yes. You're listening to Take Two, the movie program on Public Radio, KCBX, San Luis Obispo, KSBX, Santa Barbara. We're talking horror movies and monsters, and we've got a lot more to talk about, but we'll open up the phone lines in just a few minutes. We'll be back in a moment. Funds for this program have been provided in part by Morin Brothers Automotive, which is newly expanded to better serve their customers. Frida, the diagnostic dog, invites you to check out her new digs at Morin Brothers, servicing Volvo, Saab, and most domestic and Japanese cars. Also, funds for Take Two have been provided in part by Splash Cafe in Pismo Beach and on Monterey Street in San Luis Obispo, offering award-winning chowder since 1989. More at splashcafe.com. And we'd like to remind our Take Two listeners, if you'd like to write to Bob or Catherine or me, the address is movies@kcbx.org. And you can listen to past programs of Take Two by logging on to kcbx.org, going to audio archives, look for Take Two, and there's a whole bunch of programs that you can download and listen to either at your leisure or in the dark of night. We're back on Take Two, and we've got a lot more movies we'd like to talk about. We're talking about horror movies, movies of the season, of the Halloween season. Let's give you the phone number, 549-8855, 1-800-549-8855. Do you have a favorite horror movie? Did you see something recently? Have you checked out those great Val Lewton's films that have just been re-released? We're talking horror movies on Take Two, 549-8855, 1-800-549-8855.
You know, speaking of seeing stuff recently, Jim, I gotta say, I've seen a couple of films that came out in the last couple of years that I really love, and one of them is Bubba Hotep with Bruce Campbell and Ossie Davis. It's directed by Don Casarelli, who did Phantasm back in 1979, and Bruce Campbell wrote, starred, and directed a film called The Man with the Screaming Brain. Both these movies they go back to like 80s style horror, and they've got a lot of laughs, and they're a lot of fun, and I'm going to come out and say it, I'm a big Bruce Campbell fan.
Well, we have to mention the Evil Dead films. I mean, they are a hoot. They take horror to a new level of gore and chainsaws and comedy.
Yeah, a little bit of laughter there, and wonderful series of films. And of course, we're talking about Evil Dead 2, and an Army of Darkness, the trilogy.
549-8855, 1-800-549-8855. Horror movies is the subject. Let's go to the phones. Good evening. You're on Take Two.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment about the audiences during World War II and right after. During the war, there weren't horror films other than the war films themselves. But immediately after, Dracula and Frankenstein showed as a double bill. And outside, it only showed it late at night, so the kids couldn't go see it. And outside the theater, there was always an ambulance for the people who would faint.
That's beautiful.
And were there a lot of people in attendance for those films?
I was about 14 at the time and wasn't allowed out that late, so I really don't know, but I sure remember that ambulance sitting in front of the theater.
Oh, I think that was more of a good promotional gimmick. It's sort of like, make sure it's there in case anybody does faint. But, if you see the ambulance in front of the theater, it makes you probably want to go in.
Absolutely. When I hear about that, I think about the great William Castle.
Yes.
That'd be like something he'd pull. He used to put D-cell batteries on the seats of all the seats in the theater, so at a particular time when people are supposed to be screaming, he'd send a little shock through the chairs, and everyone would scream a little bit, and he'd have a coffin there. It's like reserved for you, death insurance in case you're frightened to death, all kinds of weird stuff.
But it sold tickets.
But we were pretty naive during then, too.
Well, a lot of fun, though. It just, I love it, the ambulance outside the
That's
theater.
beautiful.
That is great.
Well, thank you for your show. Sure enjoy it.
Oh, thanks
Thank
for
you,
your
sir.
call. Happy Halloween.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I love, William Castle, 13 Ghosts. I'm trying to think.
House on Haunted Hill, The Tingler.
Yes.
That's the one that had the D batteries hooked up to people's chairs. So when the Tingler, which was like a kind of like a rubber hunk of spine or something that when it started crawling around, you get zzz, and you go call the ambulance. It was just. I mean, he was a master showman.
He was a master showman, and his films, when you look back at them, Bob, I mean, they are low to no budget, but he knew where to put the promotion. He knew to have the nurse in the lobby with, with the thermometer to take your temperature, like you said, the life insurance or something.
And a great cigar. And let's not forget, he also produced Rosemary's Baby. He has a cameo in that as well.
That's right.
Just bringing it all together.
549-8855, 1-800-549-8855. Give us your name and where you're calling from. Good evening. You're on Take Two.
Hi, my name's Charmaine. I'm from San Luis Obispo.
Hi.
Hi. One thing, on the Frankenstein meets Wolfman, I think that went under Wolfman because he really had most of the movie.
That's true.
Because Frankenstein was in the ice.
That's right.
Yeah.
And on Dwight Fry, as soon as you said him, it made me think of him saying flies.
Yeah, I like flies.
Yeah.
And it does come together, dare I say, in Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
Right.
That's right. That's really the culmination of it all.
Yeah.
Did you know that Frankenstein meets the Wolfman originally... Remember, Bela Lugosi's Frankenstein monster doesn't speak. He just kind of grunts.
Yeah.
The original script was he had dialogue, and his monster was blind, but he could speak, and he could speak articulately because he had Igor's brain, and he wanted to conquer the world. And a friend of mine had... he had a copy of the original shooting script. I think it was published not too long ago, and it has Talbot and the monster sitting around a fire discussing philosophy of taking over the world. The monster wants to take over the world. Talbot, because he doesn't want to be a monster, so naturally he'd be against him. And it came out in 1943, so there's some kind of World War II allegory with it.
Right.
Ultimately, though, the people at Universal said, you know what, forget this. Just go grunt and groan and scare people.
Well, that's what they do on the Saturday Night Live thing of them, too. Remember, Frankenstein doesn't speak when they're, singing Christmas carols?
That's right. See, it's Lugosi's Frankenstein that survives.
And then, you know what, also, when you're talking about Lon Chaney, it's making me think of when, let's see, on Man of a Thousand Faces?
Right.
Let's see, Greg Cagney played that part, right?
Yes,
absolutely right.
Yeah, that was a really good movie. And if that was true, then the parents were both deaf. Remember? That was the thing about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that movie.
Great film.
Two funny things. When I saw House on Haunted Hill, they had a clothesline across the theater, and they sent this little ghost across at one part.
I love it.
Yeah, and one movie that I wanted to mention is Ray Milland in Man with the X-Ray Eyes.
Oh, excellent film.
Oh my God, I saw that as the third film in the drive-in.
Oh.
Roger Corman, AIP, and let's not forget Don Rickles in a very powerful role.
Right. And then at the end is so excellent. I don't want to say it in case somebody, when they're at the revival tent.
Right. If thine eye
it.
offend thee.
Oh, that was so good.
Yes.
Great film.
And only one other one I'm thinking of, and I can't think of the name of it. Maybe you guys know. It's the one where the guy's girlfriend gets in an accident, gets her head cut off. He keeps it alive on the table.
Oh, the brain that wouldn't die.
Okay, and he's trying to get a model, and he's gonna sew the head on this on the model. Yeah, and then he's got that conglomeration of parts made into a monster in the closet. And I can remember when my sister and I saw that, we were kind of little. The monster gets out, and he bites the guy's neck and spits out his jugular vein on the steps. And we
rips his arm off. Yep. So a lot of some kind of raspberry jam thrown around there.
Yeah.
Epic, bad, wonderful horror.
I know it was.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
you're very welcome.
Take care.
Bye.
Good evening. You're on Take Two.
Hi, this is Artie from San Luis Obispo.
Howdy.
What about the Fearless Vampire Killers with Sharon Tate?
Also Roman Polanski.
Yep. Excellent film.
I saw that a long time ago as a double feature with a movie called Venus in Furs with Barbara McNair.
I know that. James Darren was in that. That's an old Jess Franco film.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fun. I like Venus in Furs a lot.
It was just really weird.
It's got Klaus Kinski in it, too, so you guaranteed weird.
Yeah, it was. I sat there and watched it, and I thought, what is the point of this? And then you realize that everybody's a ghost at the end of it. It's like, well, okay.
Well, Jess Franco moves in very mysterious ways. I think a lot of times he didn't quite know what he was trying to do. But it looks good, and it's just weird enough to keep your attention.
Yeah.
So
the thing I liked about Fearless Vampire Killers was every room had garlic all over it, and if you like garlic, it was a great movie.
And who doesn't?
Yeah, and who doesn't?
Yeah.
Okay, vote Fearless Vampire Killers. Great, thanks.
Great film.
Good evening. You're on Take Two.
Hi.
Hi.
This is Rosie from Grover Beach.
Hi, Rosie.
And I can't usually look at horror films because I'm a real scaredy cat.
That's okay.
But I love Mel Brooks' Frankenstein.
We should.
Young Frankenstein. I just love that movie. I know practically every line. And I want to talk about, if I may, Lon Chaney Jr. a little bit. Not a horror film, but wasn't he wonderful in Of Mice and Men?
Absolutely.
Oh, he was great.
Classic as Lenny.
And I think that really indicated what a great actor he really was.
Yes,
but
he was.
It just, he never really got an opportunity. I think about his small bit in High Noon, which was very good, too. And, you just, well, sometimes a guy gets typecast, and that's it. And it's really a shame, because he could do he was terrific.
He was.
In Of Mice and Men.
Oh, yeah, it's just
heartbreakingly
one of my favorite films. And
wonderful.
then his father, of course, was just amazing. But even though I can't usually watch them, but I went to see the new Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, the musical.
And, it wasn't even scary, which is good for me since I get scared easily. But, the original, it just failed by comparison to Lon Chaney.
I think it's using that subject matter in a different context, more of a love story and more of a musical, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, Rosie, thanks for your call. We'll play a clip that you will...
Thank you. Love your show.
Oh, we'll have a
As
clip for you
always.
later on in
Bye-bye.
the show. Thanks.
Bye.
Good evening. You're on Take Two.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm David Freeman from Cambria.
Hey, David.
Are you David?
Yes, I have a movie that's still... It's one of those films that you saw when you were a kid, and you think, that had to be the scariest movie I ever saw. If I saw it now, of course, it would be really, really corny or whatever, but it was called It, the Terror Beyond Space.
Oh, yeah, you talk
Now, this is the
dirty
original
to me.
Alien, I think. This thing gets on the spacecraft. Nobody knows it crawls on board, and it slowly attacks and kills, sucks the life out of different people, and moves itself up the levels of the spacecraft as they go through it. They finally kill it at the end by releasing all the air out of the spaceship at the end. But does anybody remember that one?
No, David, I got to tell you this. This is one of Bob's all-time favorite movies.
Yes, all
yes. You know, it's embarrassing because I try to inject this film. I think we were talking about Truffaut 6 months ago, and I worked It the Terror from Beyond Space into the dialogue. I'm kidding, of course, but one of my all-time favorite movies. People say, what do you like? It's like The Seventh Veil. No, It the Terror from Beyond Space. What I like about it, amongst many things, is it's one of my favorite rubber-suited monster movies. It starred like an old cowboy, Ray Crash Corrigan, as the monster.
Okay.
And he was trying to put on the rubber mask, which was designed by Paul Bladesdell, who did The Astonishing She-Monster, Invasion of the Saucermen. He was a expert at doing super low budget AIP movies in the 50s.
Right.
He was like one of the kings of that. And old Crash he'd been probably tipping on the branch water a little heavily that day, and he pulled hard on his mask and he ripped the jaw off. So
no.
That's why you see him mostly shot in the dark. His jaw is kind of flapping around. So they painted his real chin green to look like a big tongue.
That's why it freaked me out.
Yeah, it freaked me out too, and it's all because he got drunk and he couldn't. They didn't have time or money to fix the rubber mask he had to wear. And I gotta say this too. Whenever we go to another planet, I hope and I demand that NASA put in the cargo bay of our spaceship, I want my astronauts to have cartons of cigarettes. I want them to have tons of World War II surplus weapons when they get there, because that's what a spaceman is all about, and that's what It the Terror from Beyond Space, one of the many delightful aspects to this film I really enjoyed.
But why the heck did it scare the daylights out of an 8-year-old? I don't understand this. I mean, there was something about it, the way it was crawling through those ventilator shafts.
You know what it was?
With that jaw, slack jaw. I don't know what it
You know what scared me was when he would punch his way through the hatches. He'd never open them. He'd punch his way through and crawl through, and bit by bit, because he's always moving in darkness because his suit is damaged, and so it's the darkness too that scares a kid.
Oh, you're getting rid of this long time fear that I've had by disclosing all of these elements. What am I going to do without It the Terror Beyond Space? It's all a folly now for me.
No, you know what? Go out and buy. It's on. The people at MGM have lovingly restored this film. It's on DVD. Go buy a copy. I watch this movie once, twice a month when I'm feeling bad, which is...
You're a liar. I don't believe you could have possibly watched It the Terror Beyond Space twice a month.
I will vouch for Bob. He watches this movie. This is
Edward L. Kahn, one of my favorite filmmakers.
Okay.
And this is the movie Ridley Scott ripped off in part for Alien.
Absolutely. When I saw the series of Aliens, especially the very first one, the fact that they leave the craft unattended, or this kind of wandering away and having this thing get on. I know that, as I remember in the original film, It's the Terror Beyond Space, they're away from the ship, and this thing creeps on. It gets on there.
It gets on because they're dumping garbage.
On the ship with this drunk, with the slack jaw, and it's like...
You know why he got on? They're dumping garbage on Mars. All right, just... open the chute and just dump all the garbage there. We got to get going.
Okay. Well,
David,
thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Okay,
thanks,
bye-bye.
David.
Hey, before we go to our next phone calls, I think we should play a clip for Rosie. Let's see if we can get. Is Hank in there in the projection room? This one's for you, Rosie, and for our listeners. We'll have a couple more phone calls in just a second.
Igor? May I speak to you for a moment?
Of course.
Now, that brain that you gave me, was it Hans Delbrooks? No. Ah, good. Would you mind telling me whose brain I did put in? And you won't be angry? I will not be angry. Abby someone. Abby someone. Abby who? Abby Normal. Abby Normal. I'm almost sure that was the name. Are you saying that I put an abnormal brain into a 7.5-foot long, 54-inch wide gorilla? Is that what you're telling me?
Had to play that. It's of Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman from Young Frankenstein. Wanted to play that for Rosie, who doesn't like scary movies but likes Young Frankenstein. 549-8855, 1-800-549-8855. It's horror movies. Give us your name and where you're calling from. Good evening. You're on Take Two.
Hi, this is Leah from Atascadero.
Hi, Leah.
Hi. You know, I have to bring up, I know we've already talked about it, but Rosemary's Baby is just one of the classic films of all time, and I just love that every
agree.
Halloween.
You know, it's such a, it still gives me chills, and it's, you know, Ruth Gordon is really a scary neighbor, and just it's a very scary film.
Creepy film, yeah. I remember watching it as a teenager, and it still haunts me to this day. But one of my new favorites, interestingly enough, is a movie that I picked up thinking it would be really campy, and it was significantly less campy than I thought it would be, and that's Night of the Living Dead.
Yes. That's a great film. And imagine that George Romero shot this movie for nothing back in 1968. In fact, I think he had to shoot on weekends, and it stands up so well over the years. It's still scary, still interesting, and what I love about it, amongst many things, is that he shot it in black and white.
Yes. And also it's so nice to see, you know, the main character is African American, and then there's sort of a twist at the ending. There's just a lot more depth than I was expecting. And also, I love the stills at the end.
Yes.
Right.
Which I think they're just wonderful. It was much better than I thought it would be, and it's really become one of my favorites. So.
And for what it's worth, Leah, it's one of the greatest horror films ever made.
Yeah.
I think the consensus is pretty much in on this. Night of the Living Dead, a classic for the ages.
Yeah.
Hey, Leah, hang on the line. Listen to this. Here we go.
This is the latest disclosure in a report from National Civil Defense Headquarters in Washington. It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. A widespread investigation of reports from funeral homes, morgues, and hospitals has concluded that the unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims. It's hard for us here to believe what we're reporting to you, but it does seem to be a fact.
There you go, Leah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for the call.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
A classic.
That's a clip from Night of the Living Dead. And, you know, I remember the first time I saw Night of the Living Dead, Bob, I was actually in London. And I was at here's the story goes, I checked out of my flat and I was going to head out. And I think the boat didn't show up, or I missed the train, or whatever it was. So what do? You spend the night in a theater all night, and it was a bunch of horror films. This was 1973, and about the third film that came on, which was probably about 3:30 in the morning, was Night of the Living Dead, and I'd never seen it before. And, you know, between dozing off and seeing about probably 3 other films that were pretty horrible, this one definitely made an impact. I think probably, you know, viewers of horror films probably do remember the first time they saw Night of the Living Dead. It does pack a wallop, and it still packs a wallop.
Absolutely. You know, Jimmy, I mean, I think with Night of the Living Dead, it's like all you ever want to do is watch this movie around 2 or 3 in the morning during the dead of night, when there's, you know, the phone ain't going to ring, hopefully, and, you know, things are going to be real quiet, and it just psychologically, it really goes to work on you. What I like about it is the sense of claustrophobia. They're trapped in the house. And like Leah said, it's really interesting having an African-American leading man in this film. It's with a few exceptions up to this point. The Dwayne Jones, I believe, was the actor's name, and he's terrific in this.
Really terrific.
Absolutely.
And I love that Leah brought up those stills at the end, because like the news report that we heard and sort of the feel of it almost has a documentary feel, and the stills at the end are almost, it's really great filmmaking by George Romero.
I'd really love to see Land of the Dead, the latest in the zombie saga. Unfortunately, it didn't play in any theaters, and it's out on DVD. The trouble is, where I am, it's never in, so I can't get a look at it. But I'd be very curious to see what Romero's up to now.
Yeah, the creator of the original Night of the Living Dead, still making movies. Boy, we just ran out of time. We really thank all of our listeners for the great phone calls. It was really fun to talk about horror movies, and happy Halloween to one and all.
I echo those statements, Jimmy, and to everybody out there, go find yourself a great horror movie tonight. Let me just throw a few out for you. The Changeling with George C. Scott, one of the best ghost movies you'll ever see. Like I mentioned earlier, Bubba Hotep and Man with the Screaming Brain. Bruce Campbell fans unite. These are your movies. Also, maybe something like John Carpenter's classic Halloween with Jamie Lee Curtis, when she establishes herself as the Queen of Scream, just to name a few. Either way, they're there to be enjoyed. Have a laugh. See them with someone you love, and we'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening to Take Two. We'll see you next week.